to everybody that we have there we go. We have about 60 people registered for this event. And as you all just saw, we are recording this. So ACT-IAC will be recording this so we can refer to this, because I expect this will be a content-rich discussion from our guest speaker today, and quite informative. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Health Community of Interest through ACT-IAC. I'm Todd Pantesi. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Customer Value Partners, CVP, in Fairfax, but working from home like most of us are these days. Joined by my partner leading this Health COI, Bobby Saxon, Deputy CIO at CMS, is on the line. If you want to say hello, Bobby.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Excited about Joni and what we're going to hear about NIH. Thanks, Todd.
You're welcome. And so I could not be more pleased to have our guest speaker today joining us, Joni Rutter, the Acting Director of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, better known as Ncats, at the National Institutes of Health. I've been fortunate enough to get to know you, Joni, a little bit through things like the Children's Inn and through some other work with your institute and so on. And knowing that you became the acting director in recent memory, and that this happened while COVID started to hit, and your institute, one of the 27 at NIH, yours is amongst, and perhaps is the most prominent in many ways in terms of the cross or trans NIH work being done across the institutes, not just with COVID, but things that are becoming maybe they were driven by COVID, but are now becoming maybe the operational model for the NIH moving forward, and some innovative things that you and your institute have done in collaboration with other ICs and perhaps even those outside of the NIH. We're very excited to hear from you in this more of a kind of discussive sort of a format as opposed to a formal presentation over the next hour or so. Hearing from you the things that are of interest to us on the industry side, largely maybe focus on the technology and data needs of what you're grappling with. I've heard you speak and learned so much from you, frankly, around the more scientific research oriented areas, platforms for scientific research and so on. I think we talked about that a number of months ago that sort of drove this one. But let me do just a very short version of an introduction to you, Joni, before I turn it over to you. And of course, you have a much more formal bio on the website. I'll probably make you blush saying anything like this. But just to give you a bit of background, the mission of Ncats is to overcome scientific and operational barriers that impede the development and delivery of new treatments and other health solutions. Essentially, if I interpret it right, Joni, your institute is at the nexus of taking NIH's scientific research investments and driving them towards things that we, as those who need treatment, are going to benefit from in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. Well said.
Largely, taking the investments to NIH and driving them towards things that matter to all of us here. I'll mention a few other things that the Ncats supports innovative tools and strategies to make each step in the translational process more effective and efficient, speeding research across a range of disease areas. Of course, they have a focus on rare diseases as well. A bit of background on Joni Rutter. Prior to joining this institute, you served as the Director of Scientific Programs with the All of Us Research Program, which is a major undertaking by the NIH, longitudinal study for a million subjects. And prior to that, you were at NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, as the Director of the Division of Neuroscience and Behavior. You've been published in over 50 journals. You've received numerous scientific achievement awards, including a fellowship award from the National Cancer Institute. And you received your Ph.D. from the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology at Dartmouth. And you completed a fellowship at NCI within the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Joni. I know that in particular, we've talked about the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, or N3C. I know that's something that we'll be all interested to hear about. But otherwise, let's just turn it over to you. This, as you know, is, we think, a very positive forum for you and the government to share with us in industry these innovative new things that you're doing, particularly around COVID. We're looking to learn, and we're looking to perhaps help you with things moving forward. So we appreciate this knowledge exchange. With that, I'll stop talking. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. That was a wonderful introduction and fantastic job talking about Ncats and what we do at Ncats. So I don't have to say that again. And I'm happy to, there's a place for you. That was very Ncatsian in the way you said it. So I appreciate that introduction. I am excited to be here talking to this group because I think that if you said you were interested in learning from me, I'm definitely interested in learning from you. And I can't wait to hear what kinds of questions and ideas you have as we go through the presentation. As I was speaking with Todd and Bobby and Nancy earlier, they mentioned that this was a very informal kind of discussion kind of group, and I certainly am happy to have it that way. So please feel free to interrupt and put things in the chat. I know that there will be people, Todd and Nancy and Bobby will probably be monitoring that, and feel free to interrupt me anywhere we go. And that way we can keep sort of on topic as the conversation progresses. So I'm going to start off. I do have some slides. I don't have many of them, but I do have some. And so I'm going to start off by showing some of the slides, hopefully to get us started. And let me pull those up very quickly here. And we'll get started. So this is a discussion. I want to focus, the key word on this title slide is discussion. So again, I'm really looking forward to the engagement and interaction with all of you. And really happy to be here to talk about what Ncats is and does. And then I'm going to talk more specifically, though, about one of the more recent programs that Todd mentioned on electronic health records in the time of the pandemic. And it's a project that we started when the pandemic started. And the whole reason we started it was because of the pandemic. And I think, though, it's really showing us that we have a lot more work to do in this space. And so I'm interested in getting your thoughts and ideas on that. But first, let me start out by telling you a little bit about what Ncats does. We're an organization within the NIH, one of the 27 different institutes and centers, and we're one of those organizations at the NIH that doesn't have a focus on a particular disease. Our focus, as Todd said, is to really bring the scientific discoveries to enable health solutions from those scientific discoveries, whether those be technologies or diagnostics or databases. Those are the types of things that we want to create to enable sort of better health for all of us. And because of that, it's a bit daunting, as you might imagine. So I show here at the top of the screen the translational science spectrum. So basic science, you can imagine, is the entire space to the left-hand side of that chevron arrow, and that's a huge space. And on the right-hand side, in the chevron arrow itself, from pre-discovery all the way through to enabling post-marketing evaluation and impacting treatment within the communities themselves, that's the space that Ncats covers. So it's preclinical and clinical translational science. It's a pretty broad area of space when you think about all of the work that we do in biology. So that is pretty big space, but also in terms of the types of diseases and health areas that we study is also very broad. We don't have a focus, as I mentioned, and so we think there are about 10,000 diseases out there, and all of them are on the table for Ncats. The other thing about those 10,000 diseases is that if you look at sort of the daily quality of the disability adjusted life years, for example, for any of those common diseases or even rare diseases, but mainly for the common diseases. If you think of the big ones like heart disease, diabetes, those sorts of things, we have more tools and technologies and diagnostics to really help us manage those diseases, but we haven't made a lot of progress in terms of treating and curing those diseases. And so we're doing well in terms of more tools and technologies, but also the numbers and prevalence of those diseases are growing, not diminishing. So we're still going in the wrong direction. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But part of the idea behind Ncats is to understand how we can address not only the scientific issues underlying why that might be the case, but also to address the operational issues, the non-scientific issues. Why do things move a little bit more slowly? What are the crimps in the translational pipeline that are slowing us down? And so the other part of Ncats is to really understand what those crimps are. And so I've used this middle arrow here to identify what those crimps might look like, to graphically represent what those crimps look like. And so if you can imagine the science that comes in on the left-hand side with those 4 arrows, if you hit operational snags, that's going to slow us down. It's going to reduce that flow rate through the pipeline. And then other big hurdles like financial hurdles or administrative hurdles are also quite large. And so that can even reduce the flow rate even more. So we try to tackle each of these areas. It doesn't have to be scientific. That's not all we accomplish, but we also try to understand what are the other things that cause the crimps in this translational science pipeline. And the goal then, of course, is to address those crimps to be able to make the arrows or the science move much more swimmingly through the pipeline. Now, it sort of looks easy here. It's of course not, and I know that all of you know that. But I think that in terms of how we address this, it's not just about the scientific problems, as I've mentioned. It's also about the ecosystem, and it's bringing in the .govs, the .coms, the .edus, and the .orgs all together to really also help ensure that this ecosystem is well in place to help address these types of problems. So those are some of the main issues. And with 10,000 diseases out there, that's also very daunting. And we also know that about 70% of those 10,000 diseases are in the rare disease category. So as Todd mentioned, that's another sort of area of focus for Ncats, is thinking about how we can start to tackle the bulk of the diseases out there as being rare diseases. We know that there are only about 500 treatments for diseases, for those 10,000 diseases. So 95% of the diseases out there don't have a treatment or a cure available. And so using this process of this dual strategy, sort of doing the translational science, moving things through this pipeline from pre-discovery to drug discovery to preclinical development, and then into the clinical translational research space. Those are important aspects. But then also the translational science piece, how do we learn from that translational research to understand how to address the translational science problems, those operational problems, those financial problems, those administrative problems? How do we do contracts faster? For example, that's one of the main things that we run into, is it takes us a long time to even just get a contract in place. Can we figure out ways to do that faster? Those are the administrative hurdles that we're kind of talking about. So that's sort of what we do and how we do it. And our goal is, our mission really is to turn basic science observations into health solutions through translational science. And our idea and our driving hope behind this is to bring more treatments to all people more quickly. And I think that this dual strategy is really one way for us to get there. So that's sort of who we are at Ncats, and the Ncats way, so to speak, is to understand how we can nurture and develop cross-cutting partnerships and collaborations across all of these different sectors to help us tackle these problems collectively. We also like to create very robust platform technologies to also drive the innovation, drive the creativity around understanding how we can tackle the science better, faster, and more effectively. And we also think about how do we engage stakeholders a little bit more transformatively. And part of that is making sure that we keep the patients who are affected by particular diseases that we're working on at the center of how we think about that. And bringing the needs of the patients into how we think, how we design, and how we conduct all of our experiments moving forward. And so that's basically what that translates into, is when we hold our meetings to think about the science that we're supporting, is we invite patients to provide their perspective. And I think that's so critical in how we think about the science, because when they talk at a scientific meeting, it brings the real the real reason, the big why of why we're doing this to the table, to the front and center. And that's, I think, so important in what we do. So that stakeholder involvement, that stakeholder engagement is really important, and especially with patients. And then we also think about this in a very sort of risk-taking way of promoting the science and conducting the science. And a lot of what we do is we tackle things that may not be of commercial value or of commercial interest to the private sector. And so when we think about rare diseases, for example, that's just not something that the private sector is necessarily as interested in as a commercial venture. And so what we can do, though, is create ways in which we de-risk that so that we can make it attractive to the commercial sector and get them involved at some time along the way of this developmental pipeline that I'm showing on the screen. So I think that those are just some of the ideas and the sort of the way in which Ncats conducts the work that we do. And as I mentioned, a lot of the work is our approach in the work that we do is really about building platforms and establishing collaborations to conduct the work. And when we build the platforms and we have those collaborations in hand, we're able then to decrease the time it takes to develop these programs and projects. It lowers the costs for how we conduct these because we're working collectively as opposed to in silos. And then, that's going to drive creating more therapies for more diseases. And in a sense, if we took a one disease at a time approach for these diseases with 10,000 diseases and about 15 years and $2.6 billion for any given drug to be put on the market, when you start to do that math, we're waiting thousands of years and spending a lot of money to get there. We don't have that time to waste. And so how do we build the platforms to be able to address more than one disease at a time? So that's, I think, really the crux of the matter when we're talking about how to really address these crimps in the translational science pipeline. Now, I will say too that how we get to more treatments to more people more quickly can take on a variety of forms. And what I wanted to talk specifically about today is how it relates to the pandemic and our response to the pandemic. And one of the things that we're doing at Ncats is we have a variety of approaches that we're taking to address the pandemic in the preclinical space in terms of developing new antivirals for SARS-CoV-2, but perhaps even future viruses that have pandemic potential. We're also developing a way in which we can use open science to make data readily available to scientists out there for any of the new treatments and therapeutics that are available for the pandemic and understand how they're effective against different viral variants, for example. And we're also doing a variety of clinical trials through a program that we call ACTIVE, Accelerating COVID Therapeutics and Vaccines. And that program we're conducting a variety of clinical trials, and Ncats is a part of a couple of those. And then the main program I'm going to talk about today is on how we can use data science, though, to address the pandemic, and data science more broadly to address health and disease. And the pandemic, I think, has really given us an opportunity to understand how we can pull these data together in a new way that has never been done before, and figure out new ways perhaps to do research. And so what I'll talk about today is what's called the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, affectionately known as N3C. That's easier to say, I think, but it's essentially an electronic health record database that we have collected with our scientific community. At Ncats, we run this program called the Clinical and Translational Science Award Program. It's the largest program at the NIH. And we support about 60 different academic health organizations across the country, just about one in every state. And this is a way of establishing infrastructure for clinical and translational research across the country, but it's also a wonderful way in which we can tie into urgent needs of the nation and have the CTSA program really be able to be there as a resource to enable a lot of the work that we can do, certainly within this pandemic, and that has certainly been the case. So the National COVID Cohort Collaborative is essentially it's a program where we have asked the CTSA. We started with the CTSAs. We asked them to, if they would be interested in sending us their electronic health record data so that we could put that into a centralized environment and harmonize the data together so that we're comparing apples to apples. And if you go to the doctor, you know, if you go to the doctor in Maryland, they might be using Epic as their electronic health record vendor. If you go to somewhere else, maybe down the road, for example, in Virginia, they might be using Cerner for their particular health record. So the way that electronic health records, I'm sure I don't have to relate to this group, is very different. If you've seen one electronic health record, you've seen one electronic health record. And so when it comes to things like bringing data in across the country of electronic health record data, that's quite complex. And we needed a way in which we could centralize that and compare it apples to apples. And this was just a report that came out in June from MIT Technology Review. And you know, this is not essentially the idea of a national healthcare research infrastructure, but it certainly demonstrates the proof of principle that perhaps this could be a possibility. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about how we built it and what it really means. And I'll show you a little bit some of the data that's coming out. So essentially, what the electronic health records do is, you know, in the United States, as I said, we don't have a standard process to collect and manage electronic health records. And there's no standard way to use patient EHRs for research to help really drive some of the really important public health research questions and decisions that we have. And certainly we can't do this in real time to date, but maybe we can do it in near real time. And so that's kind of the goal that we set out for us. So right now the data are in these different silos and also in various different formats. We need to figure out how to bring that together more centrally. And so that's what's shown here. The N3C solution is really to bring those different formats in and to de-silo the information and to really democratize the access to information related to electronic health records. And you know, keeping in mind all of these things here on the right, we want it to be secure, we want to integrate the data, we want to harmonize the data, make it accessible to all of the researchers, and keep this as a longitudinal database that can collect this information over time to make it as informative as possible so that we can learn as much as we can from this pandemic. So that's essentially what we've tried to build here. And to date, this is where we stand as of today. I pulled these numbers today for this particular presentation. And on the right, you'll see the key code here of the groups that are providing the information to us. So we have information from federally qualified health centers, from community health centers, from the Clinical Trial Research Network, which is a network that is in states that are not typically funded or not funded as much as the CTSA programs are. They're in the sort of more rural environments that NIH supports through the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. And so we've partnered with them to bring their network in as well. And then we have the Clinical and Translational Science Award programs who have contributed data. So you can see the smattering of where these data are coming from across the country. And I think right now we have 48 of the 50 states who are contributing, and Nevada and Hawaii are hopefully on their way, but we haven't had that. They're interested, but we haven't quite finalized the agreements just yet. And overall, I should also point out that that OCHIN is a part of the program as well, and OCHIN does provide information more on the rural environments through community health centers and FQHCs, and so that's been a really great addition to the N3C enclave. So right now we have 65 sites actively contributing data, of about 89 different sites who've signed the data transfer agreement, and we're still working with them to be able to do that. It's quite a process that I'll go through and I'll talk to you a little bit about so you can understand the process, but that's why it's still ongoing and it's still growing. As of now, we have about almost 8 million people within the N3C database that we have records for, and about 2.6, almost 2.7 million of those are COVID positive. So we have about 10% of the COVID positive cases within the US. And what that yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Can I have just one clarification question here?
Sure
I'm trying
thing.
to reconcile the 250 million lives and the 7.9 million.
Oh, yes.
Persons. Is it that the 7.9 are a representative sample of the 250 million?
No, great question. So when we think about the CTSA program and the CTR program, those academic health organizations cover about 250 million lives within their networks. So that's the denominator. And so what we have here is the numerator. The ascertainment of these cases is that you have to have a COVID positive reading to be submitted to the N3C enclave. And then of those COVID positive cases, we ask them to give us two records that are matched COVID negative records. And so that's how we're collecting that information from the denominator, so to speak. So we aren't getting 250 million lives here, but I think that what this shows is it demonstrates that might be a possibility. And so since this is COVID specific, and there are some stipulations. So the people who've done the transfer agreements with us, we have agreed that this is for COVID specific use only. And it's not necessarily for all diseases, but because of the urgency of the pandemic, this was something that the academic health organizations were willing to contribute these data for, so that we could answer some public health urgent and emergent questions that we might have. And so that's part of the agreement going into N3C. So that's why I think it's a proof of principle that we can build from and work towards. But for this particular case, this is for COVID specific research. Does that help? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for asking that. And the other thing about this is that a lot of these records, what that translates to is 8.9 billion rows of data. That is a lot of data. So you can imagine that this isn't just a spreadsheet for keeping these data in. We need, a very sophisticated cloud-based structure and software platform to be able to manage these kinds of data. So early on, and actually about 5 years ago, Ncats took the stance that we want to be a cloud-first kind of organization. And so we've been generating cloud-based tools and resources before the pandemic. And so when the pandemic hit, we had those tools at the ready. We were able to collaborate with people. We were able to have a cloud-based solution organization and had the security and privacy practices in place to be able to manage something like this. And so we were really able to hit the ground running. I think part of it was luck, but it was really good planning, I think, early on, and really seeing the vision of what data science can bring to what we do at the NIH and Ncats in terms of helping broader health solutions. And so it's really just standing on the shoulders of a lot of the data science work that's been conducted in all sectors across the government that we've been able to build off of. But when you think about these 8.9 billion rows of data, you can imagine that, for example, if you're thinking about looking at medications that might be important for COVID, and then pulling out the medications, even if you wanted to look at antibiotics, that limits the medications you're looking at, but you still have a lot of antibiotics, a lot of medications under the class of antibiotics. And then even if you look at the macrolides, which is what the azithromycin antibiotic that's been used for COVID is under, there are a variety of macrolides. And so then you can imagine looking at all the macrolides and picking out azithromycin. Well, then with the azithromycin, even the different doses, there are different dosage formulations. So which dosage formulation do you want to pull into your specific research question to ask within the enclave itself? And so when you think about 8.9 billion rows of data, that's sort of how it's structured. They are all structured data. We don't have right now, at least, the ability to look at physician notes, although that is something that we're interested in pursuing. And I can talk about some more of that if you have any questions. I want to point out at the bottom here, there is a dashboard. And if you type in CD2H, that's the clinical data to health group within the CTSA program that's organizing the dashboard into your browser with a CD2H dashboard, you should be able to pull up this dashboard. You can look at this in real time and see the kinds of data that are within the resource itself. So when we think about the N3C resource, you know, it is an enormous amount of data, but I also wanted to mention the privacy and security aspects of it. And basically, Ncats has recommended, and actually I'll just go back one so that we're not at that harmonization stage yet. But when you think about the data that can come in with an EHR, it also can include protected health information and personal identifiable information. We don't collect any of that, save two things. We do collect two components of protected health information. One that we collect is the 5-digit zip code. And the other one that we collect is the clinical date visits of particular people when they've gone to the clinic. So we have those specific dates and we have the 5-digit zip code. Those are two elements that are considered protected health information. And so what we have then officially is called a HIPAA limited data set within our data enclave. And so the security and privacy practices are extraordinarily important to us. They are the most important thing to us. And so ensuring that we protect that information and keep it private is absolutely critical. And so though we have that limited data set, we've also created two other tiers of data. We have a de-identified data set, and that removes the 5-digit zip code and it removes the clinic visits. It actually obscures them so that you can't figure out the actual dates. And so we have a de-identified data set that is it's really the workhorse of the N3C enclave when people access the data and use it. And then the other data set that we've created is a synthetic version of the data set. So it's algorithmically derived from the limited data set that we have. And that really scrambles basically all of the information available. And so there's no way, really reduces the risk almost to zero of re-identifying anyone. And so there's very powerful security and privacy ways of thinking about using synthetic data. The problem with synthetic data, and this is something that we're very interested in working on, it's still very, it's not cost effective for us just yet. It's still very cost prohibitive. But I think it's a very powerful program that we want to continue to think about and use. So the synthetic data set that we have right now is on a very limited version of the data sets that we have, but everything else is in real time. And I should say that I think I didn't mention this before, but for all the records that we do get, once we receive a positive record, we go back to January 1st, 2018. So that's 2 years prior to the pandemic that we have their health record information prior to the pandemic. And then we follow them about 1 to 2 week intervals. So we get updates every 1 to 2 weeks. So it's near real time. It's not really real time, but it's near real time. Maybe I could stop here, and then I do want to talk a little bit about our harmonization process, but are there any questions right now, Todd, that I can answer?
There was one a few minutes ago about kind of your earlier talk. Is translational research similar to applied basic research?
It's really not. So translational research, I mean, it's certainly applied, but I think it's less about research and development and more about, or applied research and development, and more about implementation and moving towards implementation science, dissemination and implementation. So all of the preclinical work that we do, for example, is about moving, for example, drug development and moving particular compounds through a pipeline, or identifying a new compound for a target or a therapeutic. developing the assays that would be needed for new targets and therapeutics so that we can move that along the translational research pipeline. So I would say it's applied science, but it's certainly beyond basic science and moving beyond that R&D stage. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Joni.
All
That
right.
was the
Well,
only question so far.
great, wonderful. Okay, well, then I will move on and let you know a little bit about how we're harmonizing the data, because I think that this idea, what N3C has really done and contributed, I think not just to the pandemic, but how we think about electronic health record information. This is probably the biggest and least sexy part of it. And that is this idea that what we needed to do was important for creating interoperability of the data so that we can compare apples to apples, and then developing a harmonization process and pipeline to be able to do so. So I want to give you a sense, basically the way that that academic health organizations and hospital organizations keep their electronic health records is in the form of what we call a common data model. And just like the electronic health record vendors, there are a variety of different common data models. And so on the left-hand side of this slide, I'm showing the different common data models that are used: Odyssey, ACT, Trinetics, PCORNet, and then sort of a new advancement in the space is something called FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource. And so I'll talk a little bit about these, but essentially these are different common data models that are used within the different academic health organizations, and they are they're quite powerful, and they're a way to structure the data in a way that we can understand, parse out in different tables. So I mentioned that you could get labs or clinic visits or other types of things that might be needed. And I'm hearing something. I'm going to close my door real quick. There we go. Hopefully that helped. So these are very powerful ways to organize the data, but they're done a little bit differently. And so, for example, if one common data model collects height in centimeters, another common data model might collect height in inches. Maybe another one might collect it in fathom. Well, fathoms wouldn't really be done, but height in inches and centimeters. You can kind of understand that if you don't harmonize the data, then you're going to get really, really, really tall people in your system if you're measuring inches, and but using the number from centimeters as the unit. So you can get very confused as to really what the data are saying. So that's height. Now imagine if we're talking about a particular disease, then that's the number of variables in there is immense. And so how we harmonize those variables is really important. And that's what really the meat, the heart of N3C has done, is we've created a way in these different sort of building these pipes of bringing the data in, ingesting them, and then mapping them onto one another. So what we've done is essentially map them onto each other's common data models so that anybody can use these data, and so that we're all comparing inches to inches and so on and so forth. And what we do as well is when we're cleaning these data from each of the individual organizations who provides it over the course of this data quality checks, we provide that information back to the community, and they're able to then quality improve their own systems. And so over time, they're improving their own data models, and the data are becoming cleaner and better and stronger. So this has really been an important contribution. And just a quick word on the FHIR resource. So the FHIR resource is a way of moving these types of data sets much faster through this pipeline, and it provides a standard by which to do so. And so we're mapping all of these data sets onto FHIR, and that in a sense future-proofs this idea and this kind of approach, because then we're not reliant upon any particular common data model. We're just reliant upon how we can map those common data models onto FHIR. So that's been a really important feature of what we're doing here. So once we get all of these data through and we clean the data and then we provide that back we've picked one of these common data models as the standard. The OMOP data standard from Odyssey is the one that's most used. And so that's why we're using it. And then we serve that up to the community, of course, for accessing and then using. So this is really the heart of what N3C is. And over the course of the period of time that we've had it open, it was actually open just a year ago. September 3rd was when we launched the N3C database. So it's been open a year. We now have almost 3,000 users within the database using the resource. And we're starting to see the publications come out of it. And so there are a variety of publications around sort of showing what can be the description of N3C, how it was made, but also things about how we can study and use this for addressing health equity and ensuring that we think about questions related to health equity. When you have a database like this, you have common data models, you have the data mapping onto a standard, and you create algorithms. And so when you create algorithms for artificial intelligence or machine learning practices, you want to make sure that those algorithms are in the spirit of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think that making sure that we create that expectation of health equity in the use of these data is really important. There's been a paper on medications used for diabetes and medications used to help treat cancer, and there's been a few on machine learning. And there have been a variety of not a variety of papers, but a variety of researchers who are looking at the difference between rural and urban populations within the N3C data enclave. And what they found is that the mortality rates of individuals who are from the rural populations are 40% higher than those within the urban populations. So that's kind of the power that you can see from the data that are in the N3C data enclave. More recently, people are looking at how to use this enclave to understand the effects of long COVID. And we've heard a lot about this idea that people there are some people who get COVID who are susceptible to or have symptoms that just don't go away. So can we identify those individuals earlier and be able to treat them differently? That's another kind of way in which we can think about the use of the data.
Can I ask
yeah,
two
go ahead.
questions here, please? So one coming in from the audience, let's see, it's in the chat, but I'll read it off. How will Ncats data harmonization work with other institutes and centers' own data harmonization efforts? E.g., National Cancer Institute has its own data commons and semantic structure. And then how is this work related to the NIH Office of Data Sciences work?
So great questions. You guys are familiar with NIH. That's fantastic. So I should say that this is done as with everything that Ncats does is a partnership. Everything is team science. We've done this with NCI. NCI has been an incredible partner in this work, and so we've worked with them. We've worked with ODSS along the way. They've helped support some of this work as well. And so all of this is in collaboration with those groups. And I will also say it's not just within the NIH, it's also across the HHS organization. We've been working with the Office of the National Coordinator. We've been working with the FDA. And for example, I'll just say too that ingestion is one thing, but harmonizing these data and make them interoperable is another thing. So I mentioned FHIR. We're also mapping everything onto CDISC, which is the FDA version of the common data model that they use. And so if there are packages that need to be submitted to the FDA that might come out of N3C, then we've already done that mapping for them. And the FDA will be, that is one consumer, for example, of the information. So we've been working closely with the FDA as well, all along the way to make sure that this harmonization pipeline is as robust and interoperable with all of our partners that we're working with. So that's a great question. I'm glad to clarify that.
And then thank you. And then let me ask about it and the investigators, the consumers or the users of this. Is it Are there investigators at all 27 institutes, at least theoretically, who could use this? Is it only intramural? Is it also extramural? Is it, do you have to go through a process to apply, like you have to go through like National Center for Environmental Health or CMS?
Yeah, another great question. So you can even go to Ncats to find that out. On our website, if you type in N3C and data access, for example, if you Google that, we have a data use agreement, and essentially anybody can use these data. For people who are not researchers, for example, we've even had high school kids who've wanted to look at the N3C database. So we allow them to use the synthetic tier of data, and they sign a data use agreement, and essentially that's how we've been able to manage that. For the rest of the world, what happens is the data use agreement is an umbrella agreement that we have with the institution or organization, and the security officer or the lead CEO is responsible for signing that particular agreement. And then if that is in place, then anyone within that organization is able to apply for access to the data and through what's called a data use request. And that's just a request to use the data that there's a code of conduct, there's a variety of stipulations, like, for example, the question that you ask needs to be related to COVID-19 because we need to honor the reason of the data transfer from the organizations who've provided the data. And so again, that stewardship, there's a whole sort of governance structure and stewardship behind how we do that access. And I'll also say too that in terms of access, we have a data access committee. And so the data use requests are all submitted through this data access committee, and they evaluate all of those things and help sort of pull along the individuals who are interested in accessing it if they need some help along the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so that's interoperability. And I don't want you to think that we've tackled everything here and we have all of the answers, because that is indeed not true. There are still a lot of ongoing challenges for thinking about, electronic health record and real world data research. But I think what we've shown is that proof of principle that this can be effective and valuable and can indeed speed research. It is a very different way of doing research. We have a centralized environment. The technology today may make it so that it doesn't have to be centralized. It could be sort of a hybrid kind of environment where there might be federated models as well as centralized models for where the data are. There may be a way to do centralized computing on those data, for example, that might be ephemeral. So you put the data in there to do a compute, but then the data goes away. So there's nothing really kept. There are a variety of sort of ways to think about setting up sort of a future of what this might look like. This is certainly a good version 1, but I think that there are, a variety of ways to think about a version 2 and what that might look like. And in addition to that, there are a variety of policy needs for basically using a cloud or enclave type of environment. And the privacy and security issues are, of course, among them. But I think this idea of building trust across the community in the way that we've handled this in terms of generating agreements with the stakeholders that we're getting data from and who are using the data, everybody's on the same page about what's expected. And I think that the use of those agreements provides that transparency about doing this. There are other ways that we've thought about this in terms of more of this federated model and something that's called privacy preserving record linkage, or something called PPRL. And it's a way of essentially generating de-identified patient information using keys or what's called hashes or tokens. And so essentially you create a token for a variety of specific information about an individual that can become a unique identifier, but it isn't something that is identifiable to the person itself. But you can then use that key and look at other data sets that are not within your own enclave to be able to see if there are duplications of individuals, or to perhaps add more data types to an enclave that you don't have, but that might be elsewhere. So this privacy preserving linkage, and things like synthetic data are other ways to think through this. And of course, there are sociological issues as well. A lot of the EHRs are being monetized now. There are a variety of companies who monetize the use of electronic health records. And so thinking about through sort of the business model of this to make sure that researchers have freely available access to research is going to be important for as the lifeblood for furthering the health needs of certainly the pandemic, but even beyond the other urgencies of all the diseases out there. So these are the changing environments that we need to sort of be thoughtful of, and anything that we build, certainly now and moving forward, we want to think about that future proofing and flexibility nature of what we're trying to build. So this is sort of just what I'm talking about, the privacy preserving linkage. I won't talk about that much more, but and then the synthetic data version that I mentioned to you is really we've tested the synthetic data version versus the limited data set, and the synthetic algorithms do work very well. But again, the compute intensiveness of this is cost prohibitive at the moment. And I'm hoping that over time, this is an area of research and development that will really get much better as we go forward. And this is my last slide. The question about thinking about common data models and interoperability and working with others. You can see the NIH and HHS partners on this slide that we've worked very closely with. ODSS is on here, NCI is of course on here as well. ONC, BARDA, CMS, and then the common data models that we've used are on the right-hand side. So there's the mantra of the N3C community has been that it takes a village to make something like this happen. And I think that's absolutely true. It definitely takes a village. And I can't thank everyone. But these are the groups who've been really intricately involved all along the way. So with that, I think I'm happy to hear any questions or other ideas that you have.
This is awesome, Joni, and thanks for sticking to the time, by the way. We've got a few minutes left for questions. We kind of started out with this question at the top. So you built this rapidly for the pandemic. Is this going to become a model for kind of this sort of regardless of disease area in the future? Is this a platform that can be replicated for other things?
It's a terrific question, and it's one that I keep asking myself a lot. And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. Is N3C the right way? I don't know. I think it's a pretty good way, but I don't know that if we would build it in the same way moving forward. I think there's some lessons learned that we can encapsulate and think about building onto a version like that would be helpful for a variety of diseases. And so I think that absolutely there's a way to think about it moving beyond, and it's going to take the .com, .gov, .edu, and .orgs to work on this together. It needs to be for the community, by the community.
Okay, very good. I'm going to quickly look at questions coming in through chat. Getting back to who's using this resource, how are the states using these data to assist in managing COVID?
Yeah, so this isn't really a surveillance kind of thing to think about diverting resources, for example. So you wouldn't want to use the electronic health record database to say, for example, where you might want to send breathing machines, for example. That's really what the CDC is working on. So the CDC is much more for public health surveillance in terms of that real-time kind of what are the needs of the community. However, I think it's a really good question, because I shouldn't say it sort of that definitively. It's not really that black and white. I think there are ways in which you could use N3C to say, perhaps in the future, there might be an outcropping of new COVID cases that show up somewhere, or perhaps in a population that's unique. And that is, I think that could be something that N3C would be used for. So I think that public health surveillance idea would not be in terms of real time, but perhaps in ways in which we could use the surveillance to say, okay, we're not getting in real time. There's about 2 week to a month lag in the data that we can really see. but can we use that to develop predictive modeling for perhaps identifying people who might have more severe disease when they enter the hospital? And can we provide clinical decision support, for example, for those particular locations? So I think there are things like that that could be done. We're still a ways away from that, but I think that that's sort of the power that can bring the promise and the power of N3C.
Thank you. I'll quickly go through these. Coming from Bobby Saxon, do you have any thoughts about the future of FHIR? I know where Bobby's coming from on this.
We're on fire. I think I'm super excited about FHIR. I'd really love more resources. I think we need to think about how we can get these resources to the infrastructure faster. It's going to be the ticket for, I think, future-proofing what we can do moving forward. And I think it's going to be part of the solution for that interoperability that we mentioned. Interoperability is so important and it's so hard. And this is going to be part of the thing and the answer to it. And I think that FHIR, the more people who can get involved and on board, the faster we're going to be able to really push its utility. Bobby, what would you say to that?
Yes. I think that there's a future panel to find advocates like yourself to come back here and talk specifically about FHIR. We really do have to kind of set it on fire, and there's so much potential. And the potential is really in comparison to what we have today.
Yes.
There's more potential down the road, but if we can just get the forward momentum going, and there are some pockets where people are really excited about it and doing some things, even here in CMS, we just need to do more and we need to push it more. And I'm kind of pre-inviting you to come back and be one of the panelists to talk about FHIR in the future. Perfect.
So excited. Let's do it. We got to do it. We got to do it faster. Let's get there.
Cool. All right.
Perfect.
So you'll be hearing from us again. Quickly, two more questions in here. The data dashboard on the N3C website shows total patients, rows of data, approved projects, and COVID positive patients. Is there any plan to add columns of data?
Columns of data. Yeah. So I don't know that I'm going to answer this question well. What we're thinking about now is so the short answer is yes, we're working on it. Longer answer is how to do it, we're not sure yet. We've sort of thought about it as sort of a radar, where you see blips on a screen. And so you can imagine a blip on the screen of a particular N3C study that shows something that might need further work. And so that would be data that are important. The way I see electronic health record data is not that it's going to provide definitive answers to a lot of the questions, but it's going to provide like a funnel. There are a lot of questions that we have out there related to the pandemic. What questions are the most important? And so N3C, you can do a lot of these, a lot of the data science fairly quickly and get to the real meat. But when you find a positive result, how do you take that positive result, verify it, validate it? That may mean that you need to do a clinical trial, or you need to do other validation types of studies. So I think of this kind of resource as really a way to funnel the really important research questions. And so when we think about what those important questions and then answers are, we would like to figure out a way to make that dashboardable. So that's something that we're actively working on. And I hope that perhaps when I come back for FHIR, I might be able to show you something like that. So easier said than done at this point. We've been working on it for a while, and I think we're going to get there. We're getting closer.
I love how easily you said when I come back for FHIR. I love that.
Joni, do you have time for one more question? I know it's 1 o'clock.
Of course, yes, I do.
We'll have one more question and wrap up, and we'll stick around for a little business meeting afterwards. But let's see. Is there any data analysis being performed on N3C or only data collection at this point? Is the data harmonization more a manual process at Ncats? Is there any automation like artificial intelligence or machine learning being used? And I say clarification. When Jen asks data analysis, she meant data analysis based on data reuse or metadata.
Yeah, so essentially all of those things, absolutely. And I love the way you're thinking about this. So the harmonization is initially was probably more manual than not. But now as it's matured, it is using AI ML methods to really be able to harmonize things a little bit more quickly. And what we try to do is essentially make it as automated as possible, but there are going to be places where it's not yet. And certainly early on, we didn't even have a phenotype for what COVID was. And so that part of that was really defining what that was, working with other NCI, ODSS, ONC, FDA on thinking about what that phenotype was, and then pulling that in out of the electronic health record. There wasn't an ICD code, all of those sorts of things. Now that's there. So now we're able to harmonize and automate a lot of that work. So a lot of the work that's going on is, sort of on that harmonization is a science in and of itself that I think is being conducted and ongoing. But there's also the other work, the sort of data analysis is all on those 8.9 billion rows of data and how best to organize them and think about COVID specific questions. And I'll say that within the N3C enclave, I'll just say I bought a Samsung oven during the pandemic and I had to watch a YouTube video to figure out how to change the clock. So things are becoming more and more sophisticated, and the manuals aren't meeting the need. And so there are a lot of trainings and tutorials for N3C on how to use it. But not only that, when you go into the N3C enclave, if you don't have a team of scientists with you to answer these complicated questions, there are things called domain teams. And what the domain teams do is there are a lot of sort of informaticians and coders who can really think about extracting the needed variables to write the code to be able to conduct the experiment that you need to do. And so there are domain teams that are talking about, for example, kidney disease, lung disease, health equity. There are different domain teams to really tackle these sorts of bigger questions. And the phenotypes that they can pull out of the N3C enclave, they can serve those up and make those available to the community to use in their own research and other questions that might happen through N3C. So there's I don't know that I would call that metadata out of N3C, but there are sort of there are layers in which people can access a variety of ways in which people have used the enclave. But if you're ready and willing to go in and ask a question and pull those data sets yourself for a new question that there's no domain team for, you can find people who are interested in helping you within the enclave environment. You can find an informatician or a statistician or a clinician who will help you make sure that you're answering the question in the right way. So I think there's a variety of ways in which how people are using the data within the enclave and being able to ask, but also provide a resource for future researchers to come in and build upon what others have done before them.
Very, very good. I have a feeling we could keep going all day long, but I know you have a day job. But it sounds like we already have your commitment. We're going to hold you to some form of a follow-up on FHIR, and also kind of separate but related, Joni. I'm going to take the action to work with our team here to perhaps come back with you. You had a slide in there that talked about your challenges. Maybe there are opportunities for this broad group here under this health community of interest to come back to you and maybe focus on one of those and just do a knowledge exchange, share some ideas on what we've seen as solutions or just ideas for you and maybe turn into a small project, but I'll follow up with you on that.
That would be delightful. I would love to do that and have that conversation with you. The thing is, at some point in our lives, we're all going to be patients. We're all interacting with EHRs. The more we can figure out how to help them help us, the better off we're going to be. So I think that's really this is for I think the greater good in really figuring out how to do this well.
That's why I get so excited about your mission, because it's exactly that. This will benefit all of us directly at some point in our lifetimes, and those that we love around us. And that's what we really strive to do with this forum, Joni. It's not just having people speak, but actually we're trying to have meaningful engagement and be supportive outside of our procurement framework, just helping you with bigger, broader ideas, maybe some of those challenges. So I will follow up with you, and I'll of course come back to this community as well for how we do that. With that, why don't we let you go, Joni? On behalf of everybody here, I can't thank you enough for your time, your insights, and just for the way you openly share this. It's a great value to us. We hope to return the favor to you. And if the rest of you folks want to stay on, I think we need less than 5 minutes just for a quick little business meeting with us to talk about our next speaker at FDA next month and so on.
Joni, thank you. Thank you so much, Joni. That was excellent. Really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I look forward to future interactions. And thank you again. Take care, everybody.
Have a great afternoon.